All right, so we are looking at how elasticity affects equilibrium. So if you remember back from when we talked about elasticity with demand and supply, we talked about three categories of elasticity. What were the three categories of elasticity? Elastic, elastic, inelastic, and inelastic. So with both demand and supply, we said elastic means what? What does that mean if you have an elastic demand or supply? Sensitive or not sensitive to a change in price? Sensitive. Very sensitive to a change in price. Inelastic is obviously then not sensitive. So how sensitive you are to a change in price, if you are elastic or inelastic, this will actually affect your equilibrium if this opposite curve changes. And we're going to focus on the elastic and inelastic demand, because that's going to have, it can work for supply as well, but it's going to have a big impact on the equilibrium. So first thing is I want to talk about elastic demand. So an elastic demand curve plus a change in supply causes a very small change in equilibrium price. And I'll show you what I mean by that. But if you think about it, it also makes sense. Okay? We just said that if you have an elastic demand, that means that you are very sensitive to a change in price. Okay? You react a lot to a change in price. If a producer knows that going in, they're not going to change their price very much. So even with a change in the supply curve, what we have happening is that we are going to see that the equilibrium price does not change very much. Okay? So when we draw this out and we have this as an example, okay, first of all, elastic demand curves, are they mostly horizontal or mostly vertical? We talked about this before. They're mostly horizontal. I need to change my animations here in my order. Okay, so mostly horizontal. So when you draw this as an example, okay, so you need to make sure that you draw your demand curve mostly horizontal, and then you can draw just a regular old supply curve. And then what we did happening is, like I said, I need to change my order of my animations. Then what we did is we are shifting the supply curve. And so I'm shifting the supply curve to the left. Doesn't really matter if I shift it to the left or the right, but I'm going to shift it to the left. Notice that I'm shifting it quite a bit. Okay? Here's the difference between my supply curves, how much I'm shifting it by. And I point that out because I want you to notice how much the price changes. So I'm going to clear my ink here. Come on, there we go. All right, so here's what happens is that look at where my original equilibrium price is, and here's my new equilibrium price. Okay, look how very little my price changed. Okay, and again, like I said, this makes sense if you think about it. So my price changed this amount, this tiny little box in here. Okay, that tiny little amount is how much my price changed, because we know that we are very sensitive to a change in price, so the price is not going to change a whole lot. Okay, and so this is going to be, we talked about examples of elastic demand. What were some things that have an elastic demand curve? We don't really care what happened. We're very sensitive to a change in price. We shop around. We do comparison shopping. TVs, clothes, okay, most everything, cars, very elastic. Price doesn't change a whole lot for those things because we know that those are going to be things that are really sensitive to the change in price. Okay. Now, if we look at this is my if we go and look at an inelastic demand curve, okay, inelastic demand is going to be a much more vertical line. Okay, inelastic demand, remember, we're not sensitive to a change in price. We don't really care with prices, we're going to buy it no matter what. And then if something disrupts the supply curve, something changes the supply curve, it's going to cause a large change in equilibrium price. Now, all I did here was I literally copied and pasted my supply curves. I just changed the demand curve. Just changed the slope of the demand curve. So the difference between how much my supply curve moved is the same as the last slide, okay? But what I want you to pay attention to is how much my price changed, okay? Here's my original equilibrium price. Here's my new price, and I know that it's slightly crooked. Sometimes my slides don't cooperate with me. Okay, but look at this. Look how much my price changed. This is the amount that the price changed just because that supply curve moved. Okay, what were some examples of things that had inelastic demand? Does anyone remember?
Milk.
Gas, milk. Okay, toilet paper. This is why gas is a huge inelastic demand. Okay, this is why anytime we disrupt the supply curve, gas prices jump way high, right? And so anytime we have, for example, like this, where we have a left shift in supply, we have a natural disaster that happens in the Gulf Coast. Okay, so oil refineries aren't able to produce as much gas. There's war in the Middle East. We can't get the oil out of the Middle East. Left shift in supply. Prices jump high, okay? Because we have an inelastic demand. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay? So I wanted to highlight that elasticity is still relevant and it's still important even in equilibrium. Okay? All right. Now, the last thing that I wanted to hit before we go to lunch here is pricing versus government intervention. All this, we've been talking about determining pricing from our supply and demand curve, okay? So Roman numeral 1 was the pricing system, okay? This is now, we're kind of looking at this as a whole. We're talking about how prices are determined based on supply and demand versus if we had government getting involved in deciding things for us, okay? So, first off, advantages of the pricing system. Why is pricing and figuring prices of things out based on supply and demand, why is that better? Okay? Well, for one, pricing is neutral. Pricing is neutral. It does not favor the producer. It does not favor the consumer. Because it's this balance of supply and demand, believe it or not, that's not the best price that the producers want, and that's not the best price that you want, okay? But it's somewhere in the middle. It's neutral. It doesn't favor anybody. All right, competitive pricing. Producers lower the prices to attract consumers away from rivals. Oftentimes this will happen when we'll talk about market structures and degrees of competition when we get to Chapter 7. What you will find is that producers will oftentimes try and lure you away. This is why, for example, Pepsi and Coke oftentimes have sales at opposite times. So you'll see at the grocery store, Pepsi's on sale this week. Coke will be on sale next week. Okay? They're trying to get your attention. Now, some people are very loyal fans of a particular product and they will not waver. So if you are a Pepsi fan, never, ever, ever drink Coke or vice versa. Okay? But there are some people that are wishy-washy and they're like, whatever's on sale, I don't really care. I'll drink Coke, I'll drink Pepsi. Okay? Okay, so competitive pricing, other examples of this, the idea of all of these cell phone carriers, they provide cell phone coverage, okay? They will oftentimes offer competitive pricing for their customers. Other things I wanted to mention, prices are flexible, as we can see from this whole idea of supply and demand constantly changing, okay? But prices will change by themselves. Okay? They are very flexible with the times. This one I was looking at, this is the price of gas. This is the price of gas from, and then the font is way too small. The price of gas, I believe it goes through 2000, I'm trying to read it. 2012, and I think it goes from the early 90s to 2012, but you can see the price fluctuations, okay, just how much the price fluctuates just in the price of gas, okay? And prices are efficient. They will go, and the way the prices go, it will automatically make consumers all of a sudden realize, for example, when the price of gas rose so high at the beginning of the 2000s, people all of a sudden started realizing, wait a minute, my car uses a whole bunch of gas. Maybe I should get a better car that uses less gas. There's a thought. It will also help producers choose the best way to make their product to be able to make the most profit. Okay? I'm trying to remember how much I have left. I think I only got 1 point left. All right, so like I said, is that they have incentives. Something that encourages people to act in a particular way is what an incentive is. And it helps with efficiency because we have incentives as consumers to try and save the most money, and producers have the incentive of trying to make the most profits, the most amount of money. The last point that I wanted to make about pricing. All right, the last point that I wanted to make about pricing is that there's no cost of administration, guys. Pricing has no cost of administration. It pretty much runs itself. There's no government agency that sits around and figures out what the price of t-shirts should be, or the price of cars should be, or computers, or whatever. There's no cost of administration. There's nobody that's sitting around figuring this out. Supply and demand works on its own. Okay? It's nice, free-flowing. Nobody is interrupting things. Okay? Now, here's the thing is that not all the time do we do this. Okay? We don't all the time have pricing because there are some times where we try different things. Okay? For example, during World War II, they were running short of supplies, particular things, and they wanted to conserve particular items for the war effort. So what did they do during World War II to try and conserve things and be able to send more things to the men and women in the military? What were they doing? Like for things like sugar and gas.
So it'd be like meatless Mondays.
Yes, meatless Mondays and grow your own victory garden, your own vegetables, right? Okay, what was that called, that concept of it? Rationing, right? So, rationing could be seen as kind of the opposite of pricing. Okay, so I wanted to show you this. Okay, so government interventions. Okay, the government can get involved. So, pricing is one way to do things. Government can get involved and we can do something called rationing. So, rationing is a system of distributing products using a set criteria other than price. Now, it does not always have to be the government that decides how we're rationing things, okay? This leads me to what we're going to be looking at, and what I want you guys to do the rest of the period is that, yeah, I do have a video up here. Yes, we are going to watch other things that are rationed other than during World War II. Okay, World War II we had also occurs with a lot of other things. So here's what I want you to do is that I want you to pull up Canvas, and on Canvas under Chapter 6 there is an article in there that's called "How Old is Too Old for Transplant?" Okay, we're going to look specifically at kidney transplants. Okay, so I want you to read the article. I want you to read that article on Canvas, and then there is underneath that there is a little Google form to fill out. It has 2 questions. The 2 questions are that I want you to pay attention to. What are the criteria that they use to try and determine if you get a kidney? And secondly, there's a case in there about a guy by the name of Guthrie. Okay, that's his last name. And Guthrie, his case, I want you to pay attention to his case particularly, and I want you to tell me whether or not you think his case was fair or not. Okay, so how old is too old for rationing? Pay attention to what the criteria is for determining kidney transplants, and secondly, is Guthrie's case fair? Okay.